Hello, I'm Pat Cuney. You can call me Patucci. I'm employed by the Foundation for a Compassionate Society, and I coordinate the Stonehaven Goddess program for the Foundation, as well as work on special projects such as this one. And on Monday, I will take off to another special project I'm working for one of the sister organizations of the Foundation for Feminists for a Compassionate Society, also founded by Genevieve Vaughn, to Las Vegas to be at an international truckers convention where no, I will not be cruising. I will be persuading truck drivers that they do not want to participate in the transport of radioactive waste on the highways of this country. Well, that was so enthusiastic, I feel like I need to bring it to your attention that you had a piece of paper on your chairs where you could register for this conference so we can keep up with you, definitely put you on our mailing list. And there's some areas on there that are involved with the nuclear issues, and if you would like to work with any of the groups that the Foundation is supporting this area, we'd like to know it and we'd like to be able to get back to you. So please take the time for that issue or the others and check them, and there'll be the registration boxes that were on the registration table when you leave, and please take the time to drop them off. As I move into the more formal parts of this presentation, I also want to stop and thank Genevieve Vaughn for her commitment to women, to women and feminist values, and to global and local feminist activism. We've said it a number of times tonight, and I don't think it can be said too often. This entire conference is her gift to international feminism. Like the other women who work at the Foundation, I consider it an honor and a privilege to be there, to work with them, and to be excited to be working with an organization that was founded to demonstrate women's values in the context of modeling the gift economy, of which Genevieve Vaughn is a primary theoretician. I'd also like to take a moment to teach you all to cackle, a very important thing as we age. I, for one, am almost 50, and it's something my grandmother didn't teach me. I don't have time for that today, but I'm going to bring it to your attention that cackling is always an appropriate expression of celebration at the unveiling of a patriarchal lie, and an appropriate response when present at large bureaucratic meetings when new and equally diabolical patriarchal lies are being told. But I will forbear. Okay, one good cackle. Let's hear it. Oh. Fabulous. I hope you all listen to that and will bear it in mind the next time you're at a city council meeting and someone starts in on you know what, like telling patriarchal lies. I want to talk for just a moment about leadership among women. I wanted to just share that my observation is that women achieve leadership status through hard work and service. It is not enough to have a big vocabulary or to stand up in public places and pontificate in a loud voice. She who would be queen or goddess, however, the woman I am about to introduce would never aspire to any such elitist position. But for those of you who hold this in your hearts, need to know that you need to have more than bright ideas, more than a glib tongue, and more than a loud voice yourself. She must demonstrate her commitment through doing hard work and taking courageous risks to be blessed with the adulation of her sisters. The woman I am introducing tonight can stand on her record anytime, anywhere, any place. We honor her for both who she is and what she's done. For those of you who are not knowledgeable about what she's done, I want to just quickly review and share with you that she is one of the most influential writers, editors, and activists of our time, and I am not speaking of this year or the year before. I am talking about more than a decade of service. She travels in this and other countries as a lecturer and feminist organizer, and is a frequent media interviewer and spokeswoman on issues of equality. Currently, she is a writer and consulting editor for Ms. Magazine, the international feminist bi-monthly that she co-founded in 1972. It's a periodical that changed a generation. She has written 4 books and many articles. Among her books are Moving Beyond Words, Revolution from Within, a book of self-esteem, Outrageous Acts and Everyday Rebellions, one of my personal favorites, and Marilyn, Norma Jean about Marilyn Monroe. As an organizer, she helped found the Women's Action Alliance, a national center for information and advocacy in such areas as non-sexist, multiracial children's education and communication among women's groups, also the National Women's Political Caucus, and the Coalition of Labor Union Women, a national advocacy group devoted to advancing women and issues of equality in the union movement. She is president of Voters for Choice. She is the founding president of the Ms. Foundation for Women, which is a national multiracial women's fund that supports grassroots projects to empower women and girls. She has raised funds and written for many campaigns, especially those of women and candidates of color, and worked for Cesar Chavez, United Farm Workers, and other civil rights, peace, economic justice, and environmental efforts. She is also a television producer of several documentaries and has been acknowledged by many, many awards. During the 10 years in which the World Almanac listed the 25 most influential women in America, she was listed for 9 years. In 1993, and this is my favorite award, she was inducted in the National Women's Hall of Fame in Seneca Falls, New York. I bet you're beginning to think who this might be. I want to note that even in a time when leadership in this country is selected still based on talk, and much of it, unfortunately, hostile to women, she has achieved international fame. While history may record her most significant achievement as the founder of Ms. Magazine, for myself, I am especially grateful for her consistent willingness to cross race and class barriers, something the women's movements of the 1800s and 1920s, so touched by it, were never able to successfully address, and areas that we are struggling with today, both in institutions and in our collusion with the false values of the patriarchal culture. And I am also grateful to her for her willingness in her books and in her articles to share with us the truth about her own life, because when one woman tells the truth about her life, the rest of us realize that we are not alone. And I just want to also acknowledge her for not just telling her truth among her friends or in her family, but to telling it in public places so that we all have the opportunity to learn from her sharing. In developing this conference, the women on the planning committee, and Jen, of course, were excited to think of everyone's involvement, because we know that when feminist values enter the discussion, the priorities change. I think this is one reason that women are not being heard from as the discussion over the national budget progresses. We notice that it is coming out 51% for more military funding and armaments. I have to tell you, these are not feminist values. However, this is something that we have seen for the last 25 years, the participation of feminist values and how they affect the priorities. And often, I want to acknowledge this through the eyes of this woman. Her contributions and achievements are many, For me, it is a lifetime achievement just to have the honor of introducing her to you. Let us welcome Gloria Steinem.
I've always wanted to live to be 100, and now I know I have to in order to live up to this introduction. But when one woman shows emotion, then we also know none of us is alone. So did you meet each other during the intermission? Did you? Well, I hope you did, because here's your assignment. Look around you before you leave the room or on your way out. See 3 or 4 people you don't know. Introduce yourselves, say what you care about, what you're doing. If you've come here today, you probably share a lot of interests and values. You can skip right past the first 6 weeks of lunches. Say what's in your heart. See if you don't leave here with a new friend, a new subversive organizing tactic, a new job, a new love affair. I mean, anything could happen. Because it will help us to overcome this old-fashioned structure we've got here with you looking at us and us looking at you. You know, you're looking at each other's backs, we're looking at you. This is a hierarchical structure. Hierarchy is based on patriarchy. That doesn't work anymore anywhere, as we know. So I hope that you will do that, and I hope that during the so-called question and answer period, we can have a really great organizing meeting. I've been sitting there rapidly changing my notes every minute. So I'm not quite sure what's going to come out. But I thought I would start by telling you about my trip last summer to the Kalahari Desert. It was the first time I had ever gone to Africa, I'm sorry to say. I feel deprived to say. And I got in a plane and went to Johannesburg, and then I got another plane and went to Maun in Botswana, and then I got in another little plane, then I got in another plane, then I got in a Land Rover, then I drove from, we're talking in the middle of the Kalahari Desert, right? In order to meet with the Kwe people, or the San people, what are frequently called the Bush people, because a friend of mine, Rebecca Adamson, a Native American activist with the First Nations Financial Network, had been asked by them to come and consult with them on land rights and economic development projects and so on. Now, this is a group of people, Indigenous people, who are thought by those, many of those who are around them in Botswana itself, to be not developed, not sophisticated. They don't have designation as a tribal or a distinct group. There were, in fact, hunting licenses until the 60s. It was legal. You could get a license to kill a bush person. And there we were, thousands, literally thousands of miles from the nearest settlement, under an enormous sky with a group of about 12 people. And over those few days, I learned a little bit, just a little bit, about the subtlety and nuance and sophistication of this indigenous group that is a resource of great wisdom and knowledge for all of us, as indeed all the indigenous groups on every continent are. The women took us out into what appeared to be only desert with straggly bush, and showed us how they dug with their digging sticks to get roots that were excellent to eat. They showed us the root that was used for migraine headaches, the root that was used for contraception, another route that was used to render them sterile when they decided they had had enough children. They each have 2 or 3 children in general, spaced several years apart. They showed us their games, very joyous games, the goal of which is not competition but cooperation. They did a trance dance for us. They explained to us that both men and women are responsible for the children. There are some sex-differentiated roles, but in general, both men and women hunt and gather. Both men and women take care of the children. There is no value put on virginity in girls or in boys. There is the encouragement of children playing together, including sexual play. Children, when they become old enough to be self-sufficient, build their own huts, live together. It's all right to have sex between boys and girls, or boys and boys. As part of experimentation, as part of learning what grown-up life is like, just as they learn about hunting, about weaving, about trance dances, stories, and all the enormously sophisticated knowledge and way of living. I tell you this because, well, I guess I tell you this partly because I can't not tell you this because this group is so endangered now. They are being pushed off their lands. The last 3,000 people living in the Kalahari are being pushed off, and they are the source of knowledge, just as of human knowledge, just as the rainforest and other great areas of the world are the source of other kinds of knowledge. But I also tell you this because it's hard to imagine different family forms, different kinds of values, if we haven't seen them. You know, if you haven't seen a deer, you can't see a deer. But in fact, each of us, no matter what continent or culture we come from, has in what is suspiciously called prehistory much of the time, which I think just means pre-patriarchy, pre-racism, pre-nationalism. That's why they don't teach us about it, right? This is a part of our heritage. And somehow I think it's comforting to know that this way of life, in various forms, but with certain shared values of a connection to nature, a sense of balance, a lack of ownership, cooperative forms of human organization. This way of life accounts for 95% of human history. And the last 8,000 to 10,000 years, which is the most about which we learn, usually much less than that, usually more like 3,000 to 5,000 years. But in any case, that is less than 5% of human history. So I suggest that we just declare the last 5,000 to 10,000 years an experiment that failed. And we declare this meeting to be the first meeting of the post-patriarchal, post-racist, post-nationalist age. Because I think Paula Gunn Allen is right when she says in The Sacred Hoop that the root of oppression is the loss of memory. And that truly feminism, women's liberation, womanism, whatever it is, self-government, autonomy, self-authority, self-determination, whatever it is that we want to call it, is really memory on this continent, as Raina Green says. And we should remember that this is literally the case when we look at what is called women's history, or Native American history, or African American history, or Asian American. It really ought to all be called remedial history, to put the blame where it belongs. Because in fact, even in the first suffragist and abolitionist era, much of the learning, the ideas about democracy, the learning about societies in which there was individual human dignity, democracy within families, non-hierarchical forms of organization, came from people of European origin here, came from learning about the cultures that were already here. Now, I don't know about you, but I didn't learn about, you know, the female or people of color part of history, even as we count history, when I was going to school. So I am continually amazed and angered, you know, when I learn that the entire state of Florida was once governed by a coalition of Seminoles and freed slaves for 30 years. They fought off the government and so on, and that Mozart had a sister who was the talented one, and that, you know, I mean, I'm always, somebody gave me a button once that said, "The truth will make you free, but first it will piss you off." But I certainly didn't know that this form of government we have was inspired by the Iroquois Confederacy. I think more of us know that now. But I still didn't know until a few years ago that the women of the suffragist and abolitionist movements, whether it was Sojourner Truth or Matilda Gage or Elizabeth Cady Stanton, were constantly talking about, visiting with, writing about, reporting on the indigenous cultures and groups of this nation, and holding them up as examples of the kind of society that they were striving to have. In other words, they were talking about feminism as theory when indigenous groups were living it as practice. The Iroquois here were not only the basis of much of the inspiration for a democratic government, even though, of course, our forefathers didn't get it right. They left out, you know, most of the folks in the country, but they nonetheless were using that as the model. And for the movement, the social justice movements that were trying to complete the democracy, but also for Engels when he based his essay on the origin of the family, private property, and the state on the work of anthropologist Lewis Henry Morgan, whose study was, of course, of the Iroquois Confederacy here as well. So indigenous cultures were and are the inspiration for democratic movements, for socialism, for the idea of communalism, communal ownership, a different relationship with nature, and so on. And they exist on every continent, embattled, almost annihilated, the subject of genocide, but they still exist. And I think that gives us some hope somehow. It isn't that we can go back to the past. No, we can't, nor should we romanticize the past. But to know that all the things they tell us are impossible when we talk about feminist values, about changed forms of organization, and so on, about the fact that violence is never an acceptable way of solving conflict, but only acceptable in self-defense. All of these things, when they tell us that you can't change that, it's human nature, we need to have the knowledge that for 95% of the time, we had a very different idea of human nature. And I think the first thing we need to reconsider is talking about family in the singular. I think that is a right-wing trip altogether. Because the minute you say family in the singular, it allows you to define one kind of family as normal and to render all others peripheral and wrong. And the truth of the matter is there have always been many, many, many different kinds of families, extended families, communal families, families in which, in the African tradition that was brought to this country, however unwillingly, children were raised by the grandparents, because in many African cultures it was thought that when one is young enough to have a child, one is not wise enough to raise it. There have always been committed, nurturing relationships between men, between women, chosen relationships, adopted relationships. Certainly the native cultures very, very often adopted into their extended families people who were of different nations, of different races. There have always been different forms, and this patriarchal nuclear family that we are supposed to think is the normal and only one is really only about 150 years old and is entirely, almost entirely, the function of industrialization and capitalism. It was a form that was invented so it could be portable, and people could be shipped about at will of their employer, which could not be done with extended communal families. Even so, in agricultural times, even those families were ones in which the women also played an economic role on the farm. They had an economic place. It was really only industrialization that took fathers out of the home and made them the only wage earners for the first time and made women and children entirely dependent on them. So the idea that there is only one family form is really pure bullshit. And but we have to get a grip on what the right wing means when it says family values, because otherwise we will be in a continual state of shock and surprise. It may seem illogical to us. It is not illogical. It has a logic of its own. Because they are talking about the male-headed patriarchal nuclear household. That's precisely what they mean, and that is all they mean. And that's why they call anti-family any guarantee of rights directly to women or children, because it interferes with the patriarchal authority of the male head of household. So to them, the Equal Rights Amendment was absolutely anti-family because it was a guarantee of rights to women. Laws against child abuse are absolutely anti-family, no doubt. They're trying to defund such programs. Battered women's shelters, which they call runaway wives shelters, are absolutely anti-family because they, you know, once you get a grip on what they mean, you see that it's actually logical. For instance, among their values are that abortion is murder, but capital punishment and war are fine. No. And this at first would seem rather odd. But no, because their point is not what is done, but who does it. So as long as the state or the church or the corporation or the multinational does it, it's okay. But if the individual does it, if we have that power, it's subversion and it's not okay. Among their values are the idea, and this seems like another sort of illogic, is that both birth control and lesbianism are wrong. But you have to get a grip on what they mean. And what they mean is that women's bodies, which are the most basic means of production, the means of reproduction, have to be not only under patriarchal control, but dedicated to having children, as many children as possible, and the children are then, of course, patriarchally owned. Therefore, any form of sexual expression that doesn't end in conception inside patriarchal marriage and, so the children are properly owned and so on, is wrong. Therefore, both lesbianism and birth control are wrong. You see, you just have to get it, and you've... So really, they are not illogical. They are just the completely opposite side of the coin. However, I think there's something else here that's deeper, and that is that what we are talking about is content. What they are talking about is form. They are talking about who has the power to do something. We are talking about what is done. We are essentially saying to each other, we gift each other with the power to have control over our own lives. And actually, the power to make that decision matters more than the decision that we choose to make. We are redefining power. We no longer mean that power is the ability to make other people do something. No, we mean that power is the ability to control our own destiny, to control our own lives, and to be a part of a community. So, if we do away with the singular, if we do away with the form over content, we will go a long way towards changing the values. But I think there is a reason, there's something in a way that we share with the ultra-right wing and all their talk about family values. We, as feminists, women's liberationists, womanists, whatever it is we wish to call ourselves. And that is that we understand, as the mushy middle of liberals and folks who are supposed to be our friends don't always understand, that there is a direct line between the kind of families we have and the kinds of societies or states we have. That violence in the household leads directly to violence in the world outside the house. That, in fact, if you look at authoritarian cultures that have lasted, you will find that they all involved the training of authoritarian families in order to last. And if you look at democracies that have lasted, you will find that they all are at least striving for some modicum of democracy in the household. It is a great unstudied part of our current life, just as the 95% of human history that preceded all these things is in a linear sense, the great unstudied part, that there is this kind of relationship. For instance, just to give a couple of examples, if you read the papers, you would think that the reason why there was more opportunity for democracy in East Europe and in the former Soviet Union, perhaps, or has been seen to be more, there to be more opportunity, had to do with economic conditions. But actually, though certainly that played an enormous role, the economic conditions were not in the past 25 years or so as bad as they had been in previous times. Or you might see that the right wing, Ronald Reagan and so on, claims credit as if he is marching around and calling this a evil empire and godless and so on, and as if our arms buildup had anything to do, with what was happening there. But another part of it, I mean, not the only part, we don't do single factor analyses here, but another part of it that we have not studied is family forms and the way children are raised. Because before the Russian Revolution, given the enforcement of religion and the kind of society, feudal society that there were forms of child rearing that were quite authoritarian, quite abusive. For one thing, people had many too many children. When they went out to the fields, they often left them swaddled, that is, tied to boards, because they couldn't care for all these babies, so the babies would be left tied in urine-soaked rags to boards for the entire day. There was a religious theory of child rearing, which we recognize in this country too, that children are little animals whose spirits have to be broken, and so on. And this produced an enormous passivity. Can you imagine any more deep way of learning that nothing you do matters than being tied to a board in this way and being dominated and being treated with violence? As we know, when bad things happen to kids, they come to think they're bad people. And you grow up believing you need that kind of authoritarian leader. Moreover, if you look at the backgrounds of many despots, you will, in all parts of the world, you will find that they themselves were often sadistically abused kids who grew up believing there were only two choices: either you were the victim or the victimizer. That was it. Stalin was a very sadistically abused kid. I am not a childhood determinist, mind you. It can be healed, it can, things can change, but when it doesn't, it keeps being acted out. However, as the birth rate went down, as society became more secular in the Soviet Union and so on, children were raised with somewhat more humanity and individual attention. And so you got people like Gorbachev, who was a gently bred child and whose self-authority was respected, and therefore who could imagine that other people also had self-authority. And who could perhaps begin to imagine the possibility of self-government and of democracy. The converse is true. You'd not only see the destructive circumstances writ large in the world of politics and culture and foreign policy and so on, of what goes on in the home, but you also see the good results. I notice that the studies of Good Samaritans, which, the people who helped Jews during World War II, even though they themselves were not Jewish and even though they were risking their own lives, people have long been fascinated with these people who acted so well under such pressure. And the people themselves generally say the same thing. They say, well, I'm not a hero, I just did it. I just didn't think of not doing it. And the studies have looked for, to see whether there was something in their education or religion or, what produced this person, without much success, until someone had the idea of looking at child abuse. And their single most shared characteristic seems to be that they were not severely abused as children. Because what seems to be the case is that if we are not abused, if we are loved and attended to and so on, then there is a natural leap of empathy to another human being. It just is. We see someone else in trouble and we empathize. But abuse, violence, neglect, ridicule, humiliation, sexual abuse, all of these things interrupt this flow of empathy, close us down and make us feel there are only two choices: to be the victim or the victimizer. So nothing could be more important than the kinds of families, whether they are chosen families, biological families, extended, whatever form they take, nothing could be more important than the respect and democracy and nurturing and compassion that goes on in that setting, because it also will be writ large in the world. It is a direct link and a direct connection. And personally, I think that, I certainly agree with Lililani about gender. We were whispering over here, because gender actually is entirely culturally created. Gender roles, they're not the same from one culture to the next. They are not about biology. They are about culture. So hopefully one day there will be no gender. There will be humanity instead. Because the truth is that we each of us have the full circle of human qualities in unique combination. I mean, each of us is a kind of unique miracle here that could never have happened before and could never happen again. Quite the same combination of millennia of heredity and environment, and quite the way it is within each of us. And we also have the full range of human qualities. But in male-dominant cultures, about 75% of human qualities are called masculine, and about 25% are called feminine. If you look at, if you list them and ask people what they think what is, that's the way it turns out. So naturally, women are on the forefront of this revolution because we have the most to gain. We've lost 75% of ourselves, but men have a lot to gain too. They've got together. We're each trying to become whole people, and I guess, really speaking, progress probably lies in the direction we haven't been, but we're each trying to complete the full circle. But I think that the chance to develop the full circle of human qualities is also, it's never too late, of course, never too late, but it is best and fully realized the younger we are and the less damaged we are. And I think actually we're only halfway there. I think that at least in our imagination, we're halfway there. In terms of the real power structures, we aren't even halfway there, but we've at least imagined that women can do what men can do. And we've therefore convinced most of the country that that's true, because we believe it. But most of us haven't even convinced ourselves that men can do what women can do. And so we haven't yet convinced the country. But we can. We've had the courage, most of us, or many of us, to raise our daughters more like our sons, which is great because they're getting to be more whole people. But actually fewer of us have probably had the courage to raise our sons more like our daughters. Until as in that culture of the Quay people and many other cultures, lest you think it's impossible, but until boys are raised to raise children, until men raise and nurture babies and little children as much as women do, then we are going to be cursed with gender, because kids are going to grow up thinking that if they are boys, they can't be loving and nurturing, and if they are girls, they must be loving and nurturing and can't be daring in the world outside the home, and so on. It's crucial that this kind of change happens in the home, because otherwise masculinity gets to be emphasized. The whole idea you have to earn your gender role, which is very sinister. I mean, then you have to be violent or controlling in order to be masculine, and passive and so on in order to be feminine, comes into it. But we have to at least imagine this change before it is going to happen. And if we are overwhelmed, as we often are, I think, by the idea of what we have to do, that we are going to overthrow or humanize, you can pick your verb depending on how patient you feel today, patriarchy, racism, nationalism, multinationals, I could go everything, just a few little things like that. I think it's very helpful to not only remember to think about vertical history, to think about who was on this land 20,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, to look at our own history and see how far we have come, but also to realize that, in fact, everything we do matters. The art of behaving morally, ethically, is behaving as if everything we do matters, because it does. Marx got a lot of things right, But one thing he didn't get right was that the end justifies the means. In fact, the means is the ends. The means we choose dictates the kind of end we get. And if we are feeling discouraged, we can take heart in the new physics and many other models of non-hierarchical, orderly chaos, which is indeed the way life is organized. And we can remember that now even physicists admit that the flap of a butterfly's wing here can change the weather hundreds of miles away. Everything we do has enormous power. And just all of us in this room, and the world could be a lot more like this room, make one hell of a butterfly. Thank you.